ask each of my panelists briefly, if you would, to summarize why you think instinctively tall buildings are good for tenants. What it is about tall buildings in the general that makes them good for tenants.
I guess in my speech, it was very much about the integration of the various functions, the various asset classes, retail, hotels, food and beverage. And I really believe that if you get that right, the occupiers will want to live, work, play, shop in the one place. So super tall buildings can be a lifestyle choice. They can be living, they can work, they can essentially go to restaurants and have theatres. Sometimes there's a great deal of theatres and cinemas in these tall buildings. So you've almost got a community, the very theme that we spoke about, within the one location.
Fantastic. Susie.
So I think I'd go back to the basics. And when an individual, when you raise somebody up in the air, kind of like we are, you give them a different vantage point. You get them a different view. So I think inherently, people have always wanted to be in tall buildings. They've always wanted that elevated view on the world. And now that we're doing things to make those buildings more livable, providing green space, providing any kind of delight, whether it's artwork or fountains or food and beverage or vodka bar on every sky level. Now that feeling you feel when you're up above everything can be enhanced with all the amenities you need. So.
Thank you. And Peter.
When you are trying to put all the area in a vertical way, you are creating more spaces for your tenants and occupiers. And if that can be more connected to the nature, that really provides you a place not only to work, to shop, but for leisure, for you to walk around, for you to enjoy the natural environment.
Thank you. Excellent. Right. Questions from the floor, ladies and gentlemen. As I say, we have roving mics to help you with that. If you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. Yes, sir. We'll get a microphone to you, gentlemen, in the second row here.
谢谢，我想用中文提问。
I want to ask Mr. Ho. I'm an architect from BID, and I want to ask you that just now, for the project that you built, between building and the high pass and the garden, you have made a connection and a separation. But what you have done have exceed the scope of the land use. So during the very beginning, in the design phase, how can you balance the investment and income afterwards? Because there are so many differences. Second of all, how did you persuade the relevant government bodies to help you to realize such a blueprint? But actually, you have to understand what the government wants. Can you help them to get what they want? For this project, actually, in the history, all the governments would like to actually want to have a pedestrian street extended from CBD. So according to this requirement, we just apply for this project. And we are willing to pay and invest in building such a complex. And we think it's beneficial because we invest in the society, and society will give what you want back to you. We bring people to the garden, and people will bring income to my project. So this is a win-win situation.
Question about the tall buildings in China that we've heard a lot about at this conference, and we look behind us at a number of beautiful buildings. I wonder what are the lessons from the interaction between many of those buildings and the community in which they exist in, because it strikes me that the interrelation between a lot of the towers around us here in Pudong are very isolated, and there's not the kind of community interaction and the kind of social dynamism that you often see on the streetscapes in Hong Kong and elsewhere. So I wonder, this isn't an anti-comment of course, It's just a question about what do you think the lessons are of recent tall building development and urban development in China, and what can we learn from those lessons?
Thank you. Very good question, if I may say so. And as our panelists are pondering on that one, I mean, I'm very sympathetic to that view. I mean, to me, not just a tall building, but any successful building must be welcoming. It's very, very difficult, of course, in a global age of ever more security concerns. But buildings that are castles, that are fortresses, that just say keep out, are hostile to the general environment, to me, fail fundamentally, and they have to be welcoming somehow and bring people in. But who would like to respond specifically to that?
Firstly, I agree with the devil advocate view. However, what's happening in China is urbanisation is really taking hold. So we've got currently about 50%, a little bit over 50% of the population now in major cities, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 cities. And some of these buildings are definitely castles, as Richard refers to them. However, they seem to be changing the landscape. There seems to be drawing, the people that are moving into these buildings are coming from other buildings that are also little castles, and they're drawing them in. And I think that as urbanisation continues, I think it will just start to blend in with all the other buildings nearby. It's going to take some time. It's probably, China is an amazing place. 25 years of, civilization I've never seen before, transform from people riding bicycles with uniforms on to now, being the world leaders in transport and buildings. It's just incredible to me. But I think that next 25 years is going to see a different view. It's going to start bringing groups together a little bit more, the community aspect, the multi-purposes of buildings are starting to take shape. You saw Susie talk about that building Salesforce in San Francisco. It draws people, the hubs start to occur, and some of these major buildings are on hubs, so they're going to be interactive. It's my personal view.
I think we're in the process of getting it right, and so our design is going to evolve, and we're going to learn from what we like and what we don't like. So in terms of, we've got to find, and I'm going to repeat everybody, but we've got to find ways to connect people. I mean, that's what's really going to draw people. It's actually so simple, but sometimes it's hard. So think about the places you love to be, whether it's Shanghai or some European city like Paris. You're going to have spaces where people can come together in cafes. They can be by themselves for a little bit, and they can attach themselves to some beautiful landscape like we saw in Shenzhen.
I really want the developers to have a broader heart, and then don't only think about themselves. They have to think about connecting is a benefit to themselves. It's not losing business. It's actually helping you to gain more business. I think in this particular aspect, Hong Kong developers are a little bit more mature in that aspect because, and also again, a very important connectivity is through the underground transit, mass transit. I think in the future of China, they should consider more about these connections, and which will bring business to both sides. I think this is a very important element. We are trying that, and to try to break through all these walls, especially through the underground metroway.
Hi, Lukasz Płatkowski from Gensler. I have a question for Sam. You've mentioned that connectivity is the most important factor in tall buildings. Actually, Susie, you've just said the same thing, connectivity to connect people. With the low-rise buildings, we don't have center core at all. Low-rise buildings are thinking about tenants in a very different way. It's a providing spaces for media tech companies, large spaces that brings people together, that allows to bring people together. Now, with tall buildings, majority of tall buildings put in the very center of the building, put a core, right? The very thing that separates people. So do you think that tall buildings should go, or if structure allows, move the core somewhere else and provide the spaces like low-rise buildings, with the center being available for tenants?
Let's take Shanghai Tower, for example. That's got 108 lifts. 108 lifts. in Shanghai Tower. The very point that you raise about these central cores taking away space. I'd love to see those lifts around Shanghai Tower and then give them the capability of having office space that's unencumbered. But that's not going to happen. So I think somehow we've got to get the design right. I'm not an architect. I'm going to hand over to Susie or someone else that's an architect. But my observation of it is that they are limiting. Definitely the transport hub, it's the highway for the building of a super tall. It's definitely the transport mechanism to get people up and down. However, we could do things better, and somehow we can bring that transportational areas connected a little bit better than what they are, because you're just in a little room going into another floor. If they somehow could connect in a visual sense, I think we could overcome some of those issues. I don't know if it's glass transportation hubs or whatever it is. You might have a little bit of concern travelling in that speed and seeing everything on the way up and down. But I agree with you. I think that there is a limiting factor.
I think it's something we need to look at, creating more community space for people not to be so separated. And you know, if structurally we can solve, if you can have a non-centric core in a super tall building, I'd ask somebody else if that was possible, but that would be a good concept.
Peter.
Yeah, I think Sam in his presentation talked about sky lobbies. I think it's very difficult to change the core. I mean, from a developer's point of view, the most efficient way is to get a central core, bring people up. But then I think we need to make use of the sky lobbies more and more. Now it seems a lot of it's just for observatory or just as a transfer floor. But I think in Hong Kong, okay, so for example, we are using it as a coffee shop, restaurants, or even bars. So I think people can gather there and make it more community and meeting people there. I think Sky Lobby, we have to use it more often.
The question I have, we keep talking about building very tall, but I see here in Shanghai the trend to have taller buildings in communities, like one is an office tower, the other one is a residence, the other one is a hotel, and you have a mall. You know, I've been here for 2 years, and the people that work with me moved from SWC to a place like IFC, which is like, it's actually called Kerry Parkside. And they prefer living in a place that is actually more like a hybrid, tall buildings, but still like the idea of a core or some space, instead of being in a very tall building like SWFC. Any comments on that from your perspective? Because I see both trends here in terms of we have both the very tall buildings, like the three here, Jingmao, SWFC, and Shanghai Tower, and you see like IFC here in Lujiazui, Kerry Parkside, and other developments. They're more like upper hills in Shenzhen, which is more like a hybrid. Okay. Any comment on that you see those two trends, where they're going?
It depends. People are different, right? So the world is a very different place. Some people like to be up high, having great views, having a lot of space where they can see out and see. I remember when, I actually don't remember when the Eiffel Tower was built. I'm not that old, but I remember that one of the reasons why the Eiffel Tower was built is because it was I think it was a carnival or something, and they built the Eiffel Tower. But what was remarkable at the time, because Paris is very flat, people were able to be up high and have views, and they kept it there to allow them to continue to have those views. So I think views is important, but I think your idea is that people are connected within a not necessarily a vertical community, but a horizontal community in a sense. And it doesn't matter, in my view. I think that some people will like to be up high and be connected, and other people would like to be in a different types of buildings that are all connected at the podium level. And it doesn't, to me, it depends on what type of person likes to live in that space.
I think to a certain extent, if you're talking about efficiency, there's a kind of the equilibrium, the right height for every building. So I think it's as you say, it's different people trend. It's also from developer. What you're expecting, you know. People go for taller and taller building for different purposes. But for comfortability or for efficiency, it may be right at a certain level.
Yes,
I'm from Taipei 101. I think I should defend super tall buildings. Well, there may be other reasons for your client to move from IFC to World Financial Center, but maybe lease rental is a concern in the negotiation. But I think there's one point that was not mentioned, is the privilege, is the image for being a tenant in a super tall building. I think that's very important for some companies that want to move into a taller building. Right. And we also have transfer floors, sky lobbies that we use for coffee shops and convenience stores, Starbucks, different amenities to service people in the building. I think convenience is also very important for people working in the tall buildings.
Thank you. Perhaps I could just respond to that. I think it's a very, very good point, two very good points. And certainly the prestige element of tall buildings is always there. We see that in London in particular, where our tall buildings are molehills compared with many other cities, but there still is an element of prestige.
It's a question for Sam, actually, regarding sky lobbies. And you mentioned Shanghai Tower as a good example of using sky lobbies to create local communities. And the other example I can think of is the Commerzbank in Frankfurt. But I guess the difference is that Commerzbank is a single tenant building, where Shanghai Tower is multi-tenant. I'm just wondering, in relation to sky lobbies, what role do they play in terms of attracting anchor tenants, I mean anchor office tenants, in the sense that these sky lobbies, do they divide up this mega tall building into the correct segment or portion to accommodate a multinational tenant? Do they create, local identities, for that portion, or do multinationals anchors, do they care, or would they rather occupy a single building of their own instead of being in a mega tall building?
I think the way to explain Shanghai Tower, essentially 9 buildings attached to each other, and it's got a nice sort of curve around it, but essentially the sky lobbies are the ones in between. To answer the proper, I just wanted to explain that first. So they don't have these major tenants yet, but the potential could be that major tenants could occupy a number of these big sections and theme these sky lobbies to that client, not dissimilar to a Compass style or a, Google, Facebook type enterprise, and use those sky lobbies for their own purposes. That's an opportunity for them to use. I know they've spoken about that. So they can use that sky lobbies as their own personal space. And the reason why they did the sky lobbies is to stop Taipei 101, you have to go down literally to the bottom floor to, go into the retail, not in every section, but a lot, it's big sections, right, to do that. 35th. But in Shanghai Tower, they break it up into enough pods to allow them not to go all the way from 35 down. They could do, 15 floors, for example. So I think that they can theme it for the major tenants. They won't have it absolutely perfectly correct at any point, because a major tenant may take 2 pods or 1.5 pods or whatever. But I think that they can create that opportunity, maybe a big bookstore or indeed a big convenience, food and beverage for that particular tenant. And I think that that makes a lot of sense.
Excellent.
Sam, let me add one thing. On the Salesforce Tower, right as we were finishing construction drawings, Salesforce leased half the building, so a big chunk. And they took over the lobby, and they designed, and it's going to be shared public space. Everybody can use the lobby, but they took it over and designed these beautiful seating areas with fireplace, or ones around, you back up to a fountain, and then they use portion of that lobby for their own retail. So these sky lobbies could be used for major, like Google's new retail space.